The Galactic Conclave had existed for 17,000 years. In that time, it had welcomed 412 species into its fold, watched empires rise and crumble, and maintained peace through careful diplomacy, economic integration, and, when necessary, the overwhelming force of its combined armada. But nothing in 17 millennia had prepared them for the humans. Ambassador Keth Vora of the Valanthi Dominion stood at the observation deck of Station Nexus Prime, her crystalline form catching the light of a dozen nearby stars as she watched the impossible unfold on the tactical display. Her species had evolved on a world of pure silicon, their bodies geometric masterpieces of living mineral, and they prided themselves on their inability to be surprised. She was surprised now. "Confirm those readings," she said, her voice resonating through the translation matrix like wind chimes in a hurricane. The station's commander, a Threx named Admiral Gorvin, manipulated the holographic controls with his 4 upper appendages while his lower 2 gripped the command rail. His species resembled what humans would later describe as a cross between a praying mantis and a gorilla, though he would have found the comparison insulting had he known it. "Readings confirmed, Ambassador," Gorvin said. "The human fleet numbers approximately 12,000 vessels. They emerged from what appears to be a form of dimensional translation we've never encountered. They're currently holding position at the edge of the Nexus system." 12,000, Keth Vora repeated. She processed the number through her crystalline consciousness, comparing it to everything she knew about the newly contacted species. The humans had been discovered only 18 months ago, a pre-faster-than-light civilization on a single world in an unremarkable system at the galaxy's edge. Their initial contact team had reported them as promising but primitive, still burning fossil fuels, still fighting among themselves, still struggling to establish even a basic orbital infrastructure. "That's impossible," she said. 18 months ago, they couldn't even reach their own moon without chemical propulsion. And yet, Gorvan gestured at the display, where 12,000 distinct signatures pulsed with an energy pattern that made the station's sensors stutter and recalibrate. "Here they are." The communication array chimed. An incoming transmission, broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously, in every known language of the conclave. The voice that emerged was calm, measured, and utterly human. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Starfleet. We come in peace, but we are not unprepared for war. We request immediate audience with the Galactic Conclave to discuss our integration into the galactic community. We will await your response." Keth Vora and Gorvan exchanged a look that transcended their vast biological differences. Both had the same thought, though they expressed it differently in their minds. What in all the cosmos was happening? 18 months earlier, the galaxy had been proceeding as expected. The Conclave's first contact vessel, a diplomatic cruiser called the Harmony of Understanding, had detected radio signals emanating from a previously unexplored region of space. This was not unusual. Primitive civilizations announced themselves to the universe with radio waves all the time, blissfully unaware that they were essentially screaming their existence to anyone who cared to listen. First Ambassador Peltorek of the Ven Collective had been assigned to the contact mission. The Ven were considered ideal for first contact scenarios because of their telepathic abilities. They could read surface thoughts, gauge intentions, and communicate complex concepts directly to species that lacked adequate translation technology. Peltorek was a being of shifting colors and fluid form, an evolutionary adaptation from a world where mimicry was essential to survival. He had made contact with 17 primitive species in his career, and each time the pattern was the same. Initial fear, then wonder, then a desperate eagerness to join the galactic community, to trade mineral rights and labor for technology, to become part of something larger than themselves. Humans, he assumed, would be no different. He had been wrong. The harmony of understanding entered Earth's solar system on what the locals called March 15th, 2157. They approached slowly, broadcasting greetings and mathematical sequences that would demonstrate intelligence without threatening. They expected panic, or worship, or hostility, the three most common responses to first contact. What they got was a commie. Within hours of their arrival, a small vessel launched from the third planet. It was laughably primitive, barely more than a tin can with rockets strapped to it, but it came bearing a delegation of 5 humans who seemed genuinely unsurprised by the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. "We've been expecting you," said the leader, a woman named Dr. Maya Okonkwo, as she floated into the Harmony's reception chamber. "Well, not you specifically, but someone. The mathematics of the universe don't support the idea that we're alone. We've been preparing." Peltorek had been intrigued, despite himself. Preparing? Culturally, psychologically, we've spent the last century asking ourselves what kind of species we want to be when we finally meet others. We've had our debates, our conflicts, our growing pains, but we've reached a consensus. She smiled, and Peltorek sensed genuine warmth behind it, along with something else, a fierce, burning determination that he couldn't quite identify. We want to be good neighbors, but we also want to be treated as equals. Equals? Peltorek's form shifted to confused oranges and yellows. With respect, Dr. Okonkwo, your species cannot even leave your own star system. The conclave contains civilizations millions of years more advanced than your own. Equality is not realistic. Dr. Okonkwo's smile didn't falter. Not yet. But we're fast learners. The diplomatic mission proceeded according to protocol. The humans were formally assessed, their world catalogued, their species classified according to the conclave's extensive taxonomic systems. They were rated as a Class 7 pre-stellar civilization, notable for their biological diversity and cultural complexity, but otherwise unremarkable. They were offered the standard integration package, 100 years of supervised development, access to basic technologies that wouldn't destabilize their society, and eventual elevation to junior member status within the conclave, assuming they didn't destroy themselves in the interim. The humans accepted graciously. They signed the treaties, welcomed the observation teams, and began the slow process of learning to be galactic citizens. Or so everyone thought. "They can't be ready," said High Chancellor Morveth of the Tyrannic's hegemony, his massive scaled form dominating the emergency session of the Conclave Council. The Tyrannics were the Conclave's primary military power, a species of evolved predators who had conquered a quarter of the galaxy before being invited to join the community of peaceful civilizations. They were still adjusting to diplomacy over domination, but their fleet remained the backbone of conclave defense. The integration period is 100 years minimum. They've barely had 18 months. Whatever technology they've acquired, it must be stolen. "From whom?" asked Delegate Saren of the Ashavari Continuum, her voice soft but cutting. The Ashavari were ancient beings of pure thought who had long ago shed their biological forms. They manifested as gentle lights when physical presence was required, but their intellects were razor-sharp. We have monitored them continuously. They have not left their system. They have not received any unexplained transmissions. They have not interacted with any smugglers or criminal elements. And yet... And yet they've built a fleet that outnumbers our combined armada 3-1, finished Ambassador Kethvora. She had been called to present her observations directly. I have personally examined the sensor data. These are not stolen ships. They are not modified alien vessels. They are something entirely new. The chamber erupted in consternation. 412 species, represented by their most distinguished diplomats, all speaking over each other in a cacophony of languages and emotional frequencies. High Chancellor Morveth slammed his tail against his podium, a gesture that traditionally demanded silence. Enough! We must determine their intentions. If they mean conquest— They have made no hostile moves, Siren interrupted. Their fleet holds position. They have made no demands. They have requested only dialogue. And if dialogue fails? Then we will do what we must. The Ashvari light dimmed slightly, a sign of deep contemplation. But I sense something unusual here, something unprecedented. Before we assume the worst, we should learn what has truly happened on that small blue world at the galaxy's edge. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Determination, flagship of the United Earth Starfleet, and waited for the galaxy to respond. She was 63 years old, a child of the Pacific Coast Collective, daughter of fishermen and farmers who had never imagined their bloodline would produce humanity's first stellar admiral. She had spent her youth in the Earth Defense Corps, protecting coastal settlements from the increasingly violent storms that climate change had wrought, and her middle years helping to build the orbital infrastructure that had finally allowed humanity to expand beyond its atmosphere. And then the aliens had come, and everything had changed. "They're deliberating," reported Commander James Okonkwo from the communications station. He was the grandson of Dr. Maya Okonkwo, the woman who had first spoken to the conclave representatives. His grandmother's words were inscribed on a plaque on his console. "We want to be good neighbors, but we also want to be treated as equals." "Let them deliberate," Sarah replied. "We've waited 18 months. We can wait a few more hours." Around her, the bridge crew went about their duties with calm efficiency. They were young, most of them, products of a generation that had been born knowing they weren't alone in the universe. They had grown up with the knowledge that humanity was small, weak, and primitive compared to the vast civilizations that surrounded them. But they had also grown up with something else, a secret, a purpose, a burning determination to prove that humans were more than their circumstances suggested. The conclave had sent observers to Earth, expecting to find a species slowly adapting to its new galactic reality. Instead, those observers had found exactly what they expected: a primitive world struggling with climate change and political division, making slow and steady progress toward the stars. What they hadn't found was the other Earth. The technology was called dimensional translation, but the scientists who had invented it called it stepping sideways. The theoretical foundations had been laid decades before first contact by a physicist named Dr. Alejandro Mendez, who had been exploring the implications of quantum entanglement and parallel universes. He had proposed that adjacent dimensions, parallel Earths with slightly different histories, might be accessible through precisely calibrated quantum fields. For years, his work had been considered purely theoretical. Interesting mathematics, but nothing practical. Then the conclave arrived, and humanity received a crash course in what the universe was actually capable of: faster-than-light travel, energy manipulation, matter synthesis, technologies that would have taken humanity centuries to develop independently, but which the conclave handed out like party favors to newly contacted species. What the Conclave didn't realize was that their basic technology package contained concepts that, when combined with Dr. Mendez's theories, opened doors they never intended to unlock. Dimensional translation allowed humanity to step sideways into parallel dimensions, and then step sideways again and again, billions of times per second. Each step carried them an infinitesimal distance in normal space, but the cumulative effect allowed them to cross vast interstellar distances almost instantaneously. More importantly, it allowed them to access dimensions where time itself flowed differently. In the 18 months that had passed on the original Earth, the scientists and engineers working in the accelerated dimension had experienced centuries. They had built factories, designed starships, trained crews, and constructed an entire industrial civilization dedicated to a single purpose, ensuring that when humanity finally revealed itself to the galaxy, they would do so from a position of strength. It had not been easy. The early experiments had been disastrous. Ships lost in dimensional storms, crews driven mad by temporal displacement, entire research stations erased from existence when calculations proved wrong. Thousands had died to make the impossible possible. But humans were stubborn. Humans were determined. And humans had learned, long ago, that the universe didn't give anything away for free. If they wanted equality with the ancient civilizations of the Conclave, they would have to seize it. The Conclave's response arrived 6 hours after Admiral Chen's initial transmission. The Galactic Conclave recognizes the United Earth Starfleet and agrees to dialogue, the message stated. We invite Admiral Chen and a delegation of her choosing to attend an emergency session of the Conclave Council. We guarantee safe passage and diplomatic immunity. We hope this is the beginning of a new era of cooperation between our peoples. Sarah read the message 3 times before responding. The words were diplomatic, even friendly, but she caught the undertones. The Conclave was scared. They had never encountered a species that had advanced so rapidly, and they didn't know how to react. Good. Fear was a starting point. It was what came next that mattered. Acknowledge the message, she ordered, and prep my shuttle. It's time to introduce ourselves properly. The shuttle was called the Olive Branch, and it carried Admiral Chen and 5 representatives of Earth's major governing bodies. The Conclave station, Nexus Prime, was the largest artificial structure she had ever seen, a sphere the size of a small moon, home to over 1 billion permanent residents representing every member species of the Conclave. They were met at the docking bay by an honor guard that was clearly more military than ceremonial. Admiral Chen noted the weapons, the defensive positions, the barely concealed tension in every alien face that watched them disembark. Admiral Chen. Ambassador Kethvora stepped forward, her crystalline form refracting the station's light into rainbows that played across the dock floor. On behalf of the Galactic Conclave, I welcome you to Nexus Prime. Though I confess, we did not expect to receive you for many decades yet. We're early, Sarah agreed. We hope that's not inconvenient. Kethvora's crystalline face was incapable of expression, but her voice conveyed something like dry amusement. It is unexpected. The council awaits. If you will follow me? They walked through the station's corridors, past species of every imaginable form, beings of light and shadow, creatures of silicon and carbon, entities that existed partially in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. The diversity was staggering, humbling. And everywhere they went, they were stared at. Word spreads quickly, observed Dr. Yuki Tanaka, one of the delegation's scientific advisors. They know who we are. They know what we've done, Sarah corrected. They don't know who we are yet. That's what we're here to show them. The conclave chamber was vast, a sphere within a sphere, where representatives of 412 species gathered to decide the fate of the galaxy. The human delegation was given a platform at the center, surrounded by rising tiers of alien faces. High Chancellor Morveth spoke first, his booming voice requiring no amplification. Humans, you have done something that no species in the history of the Conclave has ever accomplished. You, in the space of 18 of your months, developed technology that rivals our own, and constructed a military force that challenges our combined might. Explain yourselves. Sarah stood, facing the massed power of the galaxy, with nothing but her voice and her conviction. 18 months ago, she began, your first ambassador Peltorek came to Earth. He was kind, patient, and well-meaning. He offered us the standard integration package, a century of supervised development, access to basic technologies, eventual junior membership in your conclave. And we accepted, because we understood something that perhaps you do not. She paused, letting the silence build. We understood that we had no choice. Your conclave has existed for 17,000 years. You have mastered technologies that we can barely comprehend. You have fleets that could reduce our world to rubble in hours. We are, compared to you, children, infants. And infants do not negotiate with adults. They accept what they are given. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Many of the delegates seemed uncomfortable with such blunt acknowledgement of the power imbalance. But, Sarah continued, her voice hardening, we also understood something else. Children grow up. Infants become adults, and we were not willing to spend a century or more as the galaxy's least significant member, dependent on your goodwill for our survival. So we found another way. She activated a holographic display, showing the principles of dimensional translation in simplified form. You gave us technology that you considered basic, harmless, the building blocks that every new species receives. But you didn't understand what we would do with those building blocks. You didn't understand that humanity has spent its entire history taking basic principles and pushing them further than anyone thought possible. The display shifted, showing the accelerated dimension, the industrial complexes, the shipyards, the generations of humans who had lived and died in compressed time to give their species a chance. In your timeline, 18 months passed. In ours, centuries. We built, we learned, we made mistakes that cost us dearly, but we never stopped pushing forward. And now we're here. High Chancellor Morveth rose from his seat, his massive form radiating barely contained aggression. You admit to deceiving us, to violating the terms of the integration treaty, to developing weapons capable of threatening conclave security. By our laws, these are acts of war. By your laws, Sarah agreed. Laws that we had no part in writing. Laws that were imposed on us without negotiation. Laws that treat new species as children to be managed, rather than equals to be respected. She met the Tyrannix's gaze without flinching. We do not seek war with the Conclave. We seek revision. We seek a seat at the table where those laws are written. We seek the opportunity to prove that humanity has something to offer beyond raw materials and cheap labor. Delegate Saren's light pulsed gently as she spoke. And if we refuse? If we attempt to enforce our laws, what then? Will you unleash your fleet upon us? Sarah shook her head. No, we will leave. We will take our technology and our ships to the far reaches of the galaxy, beyond your borders, And we will build our own civilization. We will have no contact with the Conclave, no trade, no diplomacy. You will never see us again, until the day when our civilizations inevitably encounter each other as equals, perhaps as allies, or perhaps as enemies. The choice is yours." The chamber fell silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, unexpectedly, a soft sound emerged from the tiers of alien representatives. It took Sarah a moment to recognize it as laughter. First, Ambassador Peltorek rose from his seat, his form shifting to warm greens and golds. "When I first met your species," he said, "I made a mistake. I looked at your technology, your infrastructure, your conflicts, and I assumed I understood you. I categorized you as Class 7 pre-stellar, notable for diversity and complexity, but otherwise unremarkable." He descended to the central platform, approaching Admiral Chen with something that seemed almost like admiration. "I was wrong. I failed to understand the most important thing about humanity. Your species does not accept limitations. You do not see barriers as stopping points. You see them as challenges. You push, and you adapt, and you innovate, and you refuse to stay in the category where you have been placed." He turned to address the full assembly. "The Conclave has existed for 17,000 years because we have learned to recognize strength. We have welcomed species who have proven their worth, and we have defended against those who would destroy what we have built. Today, humanity has proven its worth, not through conquest, not through violence, but through the most magnificent demonstration of determination and ingenuity that I have ever witnessed." Ambassador Keth Vora rose next. "The humans have deceived us, yes, but they have deceived us in the most brilliantly human way imaginable. They looked at the resources we gave them, resources meant to keep them controlled and manageable, and they turned those resources into something unprecedented. They did not steal from us, they did not attack us, they simply outgrew us." She paused, her crystalline form chiming softly. "I propose that we do something the Conclave has never done before. I propose that we grant humanity full membership immediately. Not junior status, not supervised development, full and equal partnership in the governance of this galaxy." The chamber erupted again, but this time the tone was different. There was still fear, still uncertainty, but also something else. Wonder, excitement. The realization that something fundamental had shifted in the balance of power. High Chancellor Morveth raised his voice above the din. "This is unprecedented. No species has ever been granted full membership without centuries of integration. The risks of refusing are greater," Delegate Saren interrupted. "Admiral Chen has made humanity's position clear. If we attempt to enforce our laws, they will leave. They will become a wild card, an unknown factor, a potential threat that we cannot monitor or influence. But if we welcome them as equals, we gain a partner of unprecedented capability. The humans have demonstrated that they can achieve in months what takes other species millennia. Imagine what they could accomplish as our allies." The debate continued for hours. But as Admiral Chen watched the alien delegates argue and deliberate, she knew that the outcome was already decided. The Conclave was old, powerful, and set in its ways. But it was also pragmatic. They had survived 17,000 years by recognizing shifts in power and adapting accordingly. And humanity had just shifted the power dramatically. The vote, when it finally came, was not unanimous, but it was decisive. By a margin of 3-1, the Galactic Conclave voted to grant the United Earth Starfleet's demand. Humanity would be admitted as a full member species, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. In the centuries that followed, historians would debate the wisdom of that decision. Some argued that the conclave had been coerced, that humanity's rapid advancement represented a threat that should have been contained rather than embraced. Others pointed to the extraordinary contributions that humans made to galactic civilization, new technologies, new philosophies, new approaches to problems that had stymied older species for millennia. But perhaps the most significant impact was cultural. Humanity's story spread throughout the galaxy, inspiring other species to question their own assumptions about progress and potential. Young civilizations that had been content to follow the slow path of integration began to push their own boundaries, and the conclave found itself adapting to a galaxy that was changing faster than ever before. Admiral Sarah Chen returned to Earth as a hero, but she always downplayed her role in events. "I was just the messenger," she would say in interviews. The real heroes were the millions of people who spent their lives, often literally, building the future that we enjoyed for a few months. They knew they would never see the world they were creating. They worked and sacrificed anyway. The accelerated dimension remained one of humanity's most closely guarded secrets, and for good reason. The technology was dangerous in ways that the conclave could barely comprehend. Those who had lived in the compressed timeline carried scars, psychological and physical, that never fully healed. And there were failures that humanity never spoke of. Entire generations lost to dimensional accidents, research stations swallowed by temporal anomalies. But in the end, the sacrifices had been worth it. Humanity had walked on to the galactic stage not as beggars seeking scraps from their betters, but as equals demanding their rightful place. And the galaxy would never be the same. 50 years after the arrival of the Human Starfleet, a monument was erected in orbit around Earth. It was a simple structure, a ring of 17,000 lights, each representing a member of the generation of sacrifice who had given their lives in the accelerated dimension to ensure humanity's future. Peltorek, now one of the conclave's senior ambassadors, attended the dedication ceremony. He watched as Admiral Chen, now retired, now old, now content, lit the first light and spoke the names of friends she had lost. "I still do not fully understand your species," he admitted to her afterward, as they stood together watching the ring of lights glow against the backdrop of Earth's blue beauty. "Neither do we," she replied. "That's the point. We're always becoming something new, something unexpected, something more than we were before. It's messy and painful and often tragic, but it's also the only way we know how to exist." Peltorek considered this. "When I first met Dr. Okonkwo, she told me that humanity wanted to be treated as equals. I thought she was being naive. How could a species so young, so inexperienced, ever stand as equals with civilizations that had existed for millions of years?" Sarah smiled. "And now? Now I understand that I was asking the wrong question. The question is not whether humanity can stand as equals. You have proven that beyond any doubt. The question is whether the rest of us can keep up." The story of humanity's entrance into the galactic community became legend. It was told and retold across thousands of worlds, inspiring and terrifying in equal measure. But perhaps the most important lesson was not about technology or military power or political maneuvering. It was about potential. The conclave had assumed that new species would follow predictable paths, slow development, gradual integration, eventual contribution within established frameworks. Humanity had shattered that assumption, demonstrating that the universe still held room for the unexpected. And in the centuries that followed, As humans spread across the galaxy, as they collaborated with ancient civilizations and discovered new wonders, as they made terrible mistakes and achieved incredible triumphs, one truth remained constant. Humanity refused to be what the universe told them they should be. They pushed, they fought, they sacrificed, and they became more than anyone, including themselves, had ever imagined possible. That was the lesson that shocked the galaxy. That was the legacy of the Human Starfleet. And it was only the beginning. Epilogue, 1,000 years later. The being known as Architect Prime stood at the edge of the observable universe and contemplated the journey that had brought humanity here. Once, 1,000 years ago, humans had been a primitive species on a single world, burning fossil fuels and fighting among themselves. Once, they had been classified as Class 7 pre-stellar, unremarkable and manageable. Once, the galaxy had assumed it knew what they would become. Now, humanity had transcended biological limitations, merged with artificial intelligence, and become something that the original conclave would have struggled to comprehend. They had colonized 1,000,000 worlds, developed technologies that bent the fabric of space-time, and formed alliances with species that existed in dimensions previously unknown. And yet, for all their power, for all their advancement, the core of what made them human remained unchanged. They were still stubborn. They still refused to accept limitations. They still pushed against every barrier that the universe placed before them. Architect Prime, who had once been a woman named Maya Chen, great-granddaughter of Admiral Sarah Chen, smiled at the thought. Her form now existed as a pattern of quantum information spread across 1,000,000,000 processing nodes, but the smile was genuine. Her ancestor had begun humanity's journey to the stars. She had continued it to the edge of reality itself. And somewhere, in dimensions yet undiscovered, future generations would carry it further still. "What's next?" asked her partner, a being who had once been Peltoric's descendant and now existed as a complementary consciousness woven through her own. Maya considered the question. Beyond the edge of the observable universe lay the unknown, not merely unexplored, but genuinely unknowable with their current understanding. It was the ultimate barrier, the final limitation. "What's always next?" she replied. "We push." And somewhere across the cosmos, in a dimension that existed outside of normal time, a new generation of humans began the work of turning the impossible into the merely improbable, as their ancestors had done, as their descendants would do. Forever,